They think a fence is a suggestion. They believe a property line is a debate. I'm about to teach them that some lines are absolute, and crossing them carries a consequence they can feel in their bones. That's what my grandpa said, sitting there on his porch in the pre-dawn gloom. He wasn't enjoying his retirement. He was a sentinel at his post, a guardian watching over his small patch of sovereign land. His coffee steamed in the cool air, but his eyes were like ice. He was watching the street, waiting. He knew he was coming. In our neighborhood, you didn't have to wonder if you were being watched. You just had to wonder when Doyle Mason would make his next pass. Our neighborhood was cursed with Doyle Mason. He wasn't some harmless busybody. He was a predator who fed on control, a self-appointed HOA enforcer who prowled our streets like a tin pot dictator. He was maybe 50, with a sour, pinched face, and the kind of dead eyes that told you he enjoyed other people's misery. His weapon of choice wasn't a gun, but a clipboard and a smartphone, which he used to document his imaginary list of crimes. A garbage can left out an hour too long, a garden gnome he deemed tacky, grass that failed to meet his personal millimeter-precise standards. No one voted for him. No one hired him. He just crowned himself the neighborhood's judge, jury, and HOA executioner. And the board, led by a venomously sweet woman named Linda Clay, was more than happy to let him run wild. For months, he'd been a storm cloud on the horizon, a problem for other people. We'd see him, a malevolent shadow in a golf shirt, peering over Mrs. Gable's fence to photograph her bird bath, or arguing with the Davidsons because their son's basketball hoop was, in his words, a visual blight. But then he turned his attention to us. It started with Grandpa's tomato plants, a row of beautiful heirloom beefsteaks that Grandpa had cultivated for years. To Doyle, they were a violation of community aesthetics. He left a notice, a passive-aggressive little slip of paper tucked into our mailbox. Grandpa read it, crumpled it up, and threw it in the trash. That was Doyle's first mistake. He thought he was dealing with just another retiree he could bully into submission. He had no idea he'd just declared war on a man who wrote the manual on strategic defense. The conflict detonated a week later, with the groan of our backyard fence at 0530 hours. I was zombie walking through the kitchen when Grandpa, already planted in his rocker on the porch, growled, "He's back." I looked out the window, and there he was. Doyle, in the flesh, physically scaling our 6-foot privacy fence like a common thief. He had his phone out, the screen glowing in the dim light, snapping pictures of the offending tomato plants as if they were evidence in a murder trial. The sheer arrogance was breathtaking. He wasn't just enforcing a rule, he was violating state law. He was trespassing on posted private property, and he was doing it with the smug confidence of a man who believes he is untouchable. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to charge out there, to grab him by his collared shirt and throw him back over the fence myself. But Grandpa simply held up a hand, a silent, absolute command. "Patience," he ordered, his voice a low rumble. "Give a fool enough rope and he'll hang himself with it." That was his code. Precise, cold, the absolute opposite of Doyle's frantic obsession. The stakes were clear now. This was about more than tomatoes. It was about one man's absolute right to be secure on his own land versus a petty tyrant's delusion of power. Doyle Mason was about to get a lesson in jurisdiction, state law, and applied physics. He started this war. Grandpa was just going to end it with military precision. To understand what was about to happen, you have to understand my grandfather. When the HOA and Doyle Mason looked at him, they saw an old man, a relic from another time, who grew his own vegetables. They had no idea they were poking a man who once electrified the entire perimeter of a forward operating base in Afghanistan with less equipment and more enemy fire than Doyle could ever imagine. Grandpa wasn't just a veteran. He was a retired master sergeant from the Army Corps of Engineers, specifically the 249th Engineer Battalion, Prime Power. His entire career, spanning 3 decades and multiple conflict zones, was dedicated to designing, installing, and securing power grids in the most hostile environments on Earth. He understood infrastructure, regulations, and security on a level that made the HOA's pathetic little book of bylaws look like a child's coloring book. His workshop wasn't filled with the rusty tools of a weekend hobbyist. It was a climate-controlled lab of precision instruments, calibration devices, and soldering stations, all organized with military discipline. On the wall, half hidden behind a blueprint for a municipal substation, was a framed certificate from the Department of the Army, commending him for exceptional service in hostile environment electrical engineering. He was a legend in the neighborhood, but not for his past. He was the pillar of the community, the quiet man everyone turned to when things went wrong. I remember after Hurricane Isabella rolled through a few years back, half the town was without power for a week. While the utility companies were struggling, Grandpa fired up his generator and ran extension cords to 3 of our neighbors' houses so they could keep their refrigerators and medical equipment running. He went from house to house, checking their breaker boxes, making sure everything was safe. Mr. Henderson, who lived across the street, told me once, "Your grandpa rewired my whole house after a lightning strike. The county inspector who came to sign off on it just walked through, shook his head, and said it was the cleanest, most over-spec work he'd ever seen. Said it was bomb-proof." That was Grandpa. He never used his skills to intimidate. He only ever used them to build and protect. But Doyle Mason and the HOA were about to force his hand, and they had no idea what kind of arsenal they were truly up against. The rot in our community started and ended with the HOA board, a 5-person tribunal led by its president, Linda Clay. Linda was a woman who weaponized pleasantness. She had a perfectly manicured lawn, a two-faced smile, and a core of pure, unadulterated malice. She wielded the HOA bylaws not to maintain community standards, but to settle personal scores and enrich her own network. Doyle Mason was her unofficial enforcer, her rabid dog on a leash she could deny ever holding. If Linda decided she didn't like the color of your front door, Doyle would suddenly find a dozen violations on your property, from the height of your hedges to the oil stain on your driveway. And the solution she always recommended? A list of approved vendors, at the top of which was a landscaping and contracting company owned by her brother-in-law. It wasn't a homeowners association. It was a protection racket. We saw them crush people. They hounded the Garcias, a young military family, with weekly fines for their kids' playhouse until they were forced to sell. They put a lien on the house of Mrs. Gable, an 80-year-old widow, over the state of her bird bath, nearly forcing her into foreclosure. They were bullies, plain and simple, hiding behind the veneer of rules and regulations. When Grandpa received the first notice about his tomato plants, he did what any reasonable person would do. He wrote a formal, polite letter to the board, citing his right to grow food on his property and respectfully requesting they call off their enforcer. The letter was ignored. After the first time Doyle climbed his fence, Grandpa filed a formal complaint, citing the specific time of the trespass and the relevant state statute. At the next HOA board meeting, which we attended, Linda Clay addressed the complaint with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Oh, Bill," she said, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. "We all know Doyle is just very passionate about maintaining our property values. I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding." Her eyes were cold, daring him to challenge her. They laughed at him. They shredded his formal, by-the-book complaint right in front of everyone. That was the moment the war changed. The harassment escalated. Doyle now felt completely untouchable. He would park his car across the street and just sit there for hours watching our house. He'd walk the property line, deliberately stepping just over it, taunting us. He left a dead squirrel on our porch, a sick, unspoken threat. We called the sheriff's department. A deputy came out, listened patiently, and then gave us the speech that every victim of HOA tyranny has heard. He explained the gray area of civil disputes, how HOAs have their own internal governance, and how, unless we could provide undeniable proof of a crime being committed in that exact moment, it was just our word against theirs. The system designed to protect us had failed. It had left us on our own. As the deputy drove away, Grandpa just stood on the porch, nodding slowly. He wasn't angry. He was calculating. The law wouldn't help, so he would have to use the law himself. Grandpa didn't descend into a rage. He ascended into his element. He went into his study, a room that was more like a command center, and for 3 days, he barely came out. He didn't rant or rave. He worked. He pulled up the county's Geographic Information System, or GIS, printing out a satellite map of our property with the surveyor's marks highlighted down to the centimeter. He downloaded a digital copy of our property's original deed from the county clerk's office, tracing its legal description and covenants back 50 years. He was building a fortress of legal fact, brick by undeniable brick. He opened a dozen tabs on his computer, cross-referencing our HOA's pathetic bylaws with the supreme authority of North Carolina state law. He operated with the calm, methodical precision of an intelligence analyst searching for a single vulnerability in an enemy's defense. And he found it. It was beautiful in its simplicity. North Carolina General Statute Section 14-159.13, the criminal trespassing law, was absolute. It superseded any HOA bylaw. But the key was proving the trespass. That's when his gaze shifted from legal databases to technical manuals. He began researching, not just as a homeowner, but as a prime power engineer. He downloaded the complete National Electrical Code, or NEC, the Bible of his profession. He zeroed in on Article 426, which covered fixed outdoor de-icing and snow-melting equipment, and Article 725 for low-voltage power circuits. He was looking for the precise intersection of law and physics. He found it in the regulations governing agricultural and security fencing. A low-voltage electric fence was perfectly legal for security purposes on private property, provided it met 2 strict conditions. The voltage had to be less than 10 volts be pulsed and non-lethal, and there had to be clear, unambiguous warning signs posted at regular intervals. The plan was born. He spent an entire afternoon drafting a schematic, a work of art that looked more like a military defense plan than a home improvement project. He specified the exact model of pulse charger, the gauge of the wire, the depth of the grounding rods, and the precise placement of the warning signs. Then he went online to the county planning department's website and, for a fee of $50, filed for a miscellaneous electrical permit, uploading his schematic and a description of the project. He was building his trap, and he was getting the government's permission to do it. While he waited for the permit to be approved, he ordered the parts. But he also ordered something else: 4 high-definition, weatherproof security cameras with night vision and motion-activated recording. He spent a day installing them, creating a complete, overlapping field of view covering every inch of our property line. He wasn't just building a fence, he was creating a kill box of evidence. The digital permit arrived in his email 2 days later. The trap wasn't just the wire he was about to string along the gate. It was the mountain of paperwork, the digital permit stamps, and the terabytes of video evidence behind it. Doyle was walking toward a shock, but the HOA was walking blindly into a legal apocalypse. With the permit approved and the cameras recording, Grandpa got to work. He installed the system with the precision of a surgeon. The insulators were perfectly spaced. The wires were taut. The grounding rod was driven 8 feet into the damp Carolina soil. And then came the final touch. A bright, industrial yellow sign, bolted directly to the center of our wrought iron gate. In bold black block letters, it read, "Warning, electric security fence. Trespassers will be shocked and prosecuted. NC Gen Stat, Section 14-159.13. It was a declaration. It was a dare. We didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, just before dawn, Doyle came prowling. Grandpa was on the porch, a silent sentinel in his rocking chair, sipping his black coffee. I was crouched by the living room window, my heart pounding. Doyle didn't even seem to notice the new sign. His arrogance was a shield that made him blind. He scaled the side fence as usual, his boots crunching on the gravel, muttering to himself about the flagrant disregard for aesthetics. He approached the gate, his hand reaching for the latch. The second his fingers made contact. Snap! It was a sound I'll never forget, a sharp, angry crack of electricity, a jolt of pure consequence shot through Doyle's body. He screamed, a high-pitched yelp like a startled dog, and stumbled backward, his arms flailing. He landed hard in the dirt, scrambled to his feet in a panic, and fled down the street with a pronounced limp, clutching his hand. Grandpa didn't move an inch. He just took a slow, deliberate sip of his coffee. That, he said, his voice a low rumble, was the sound of accountability. The news of Doyle's shocking encounter spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. By noon, an emergency HOA meeting was called. I went with Grandpa, expecting a firestorm. It was worse. It was a kangaroo court. Linda Clay sat at the head of the table, radiating false sympathy, and next to her sat Doyle, his arm now in a ridiculous, theatrical sling, playing the part of the wounded victim. He pointed a trembling finger at Grandpa. "This man," he declared, his voice cracking with manufactured outrage, "is a danger to this community. He has deployed an electrified weapon. That gate is a death trap. It could have killed me." The room was silent, the other board members looking at Grandpa like he was a monster. Grandpa let the silence hang in the air, let their accusations curdle. Then he slowly leaned forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't defend himself. He simply slid a single laminated piece of paper across the polished table. It slid to a stop directly in front of Linda Clay. "That, Mrs. Clay," he said, his voice as cold and hard as granite, "is my permit, issued and authorized by the county under the state electrical code, fully inspected, fully legal, clearly signed." He paused, letting his words sink in. "And the required warning sign, which Mr. Mason apparently chose to ignore, is posted in accordance with the law." Linda stared at the permit, as if it were a snake. She fumbled, her composure cracking. "Legal or not, it's hostile. It violates the spirit of our community. The HOA reserves the right to regulate." Grandpa cut her off, and this time there was no deference in his voice. It was pure iron. "Regulate? Absolutely. Trespass? Never. The North Carolina trespassing statute is not a suggestion. It's the law. Entering posted private property without consent is a crime. Your unlicensed agent, Mr. Mason, has committed that crime 3 times on my land, all of which is documented. I'm finished with warnings." He leaned back, his eyes sweeping across the entire board. "This was the last warning. The next time he sets foot on my property, this will not be an HOA matter. It will be a criminal one." You could feel the power in the room shift. Doyle lost the battle in the yard. In that meeting, he lost the war for public opinion. But Grandpa wasn't done. The goal wasn't just to win, it was to annihilate. Doyle did not handle public humiliation well. Defeated in the meeting and stripped of his victim status, he went feral. For 2 straight days, he stalked our block in his rust bucket pickup truck, a predator circling its prey. He'd slow to a crawl in front of our driveway, his eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and obsession, as if waiting for a sign of weakness. Grandpa paid him no mind. He maintained his post on the porch, a thermos of coffee at his side, his gaze unwavering. He knew Doyle's ego was a fragile, cracked thing, and he had shattered it. It was only a matter of time before that rage boiled over into stupidity. Grandpa was a master strategist, and he knew his enemy. He knew Doyle couldn't let it go. On the third night, Doyle's obsession finally consumed him. Just after midnight, a scraping sound from the front gate jolted me awake. I crept to my window and peered into the darkness. And there he was, a shadowy figure, flashlight in one hand, a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters in the other. He was mumbling curses under his breath, a litany of pure venom directed at Grandpa. He was actually going to destroy the gate. He was escalating from trespassing to felony destruction of property. But he didn't know he was walking into the final decisive phase of the operation. Grandpa was already there, waiting in the deep shadows of the porch, perfectly still. He held up a small black remote. "Watch this, kid," he whispered, his eyes locked on the target. The moment Doyle's bolt cutters bit into the steel of the gate, Grandpa pressed the button on the remote. ZAP. The distinct hum of the circuit surged, but this time it was different. Grandpa had modified the output. It wasn't just a sharp jolt, it was a sustained, muscle-locking current. Doyle's entire body convulsed as if he'd grabbed a live power line. He shrieked, a raw, guttural scream of pain and surprise. The bolt cutters flew from his hands as his muscles contracted violently, and he crashed backward into the mud, twitching. The whole time, a small red light glowed on the camera mounted under the eaves, capturing every single frame in crystal-clear 1080p. Grandpa calmly took a sip of his coffee. "Trespassing and destruction of property," he narrated quietly, as if dictating a report. Then he raised his phone, which was already recording a backup video. Every spasm, every curse, every pathetic scramble in the mud was now documented from two separate angles. But Doyle, in a final, desperate act of self-destruction, did exactly what Grandpa had predicted he would. He pulled out his own phone and dialed 911. "Attempted murder!" he screamed into the phone, his voice a hysterical shriek. "This psycho is trying to execute me with an illegal electric fence. Send everyone!" 5 minutes later, the street was bathed in the blinding strobe of red and blue lights. Two sheriff's cruisers screeched to a halt. Officers spilled out, hands on their holsters, their faces grim. They saw a chaotic scene. Doyle, covered in mud, trembling and pointing a shaking finger, and Grandpa, sitting calmly on his porch as if he were merely watching a late-night movie. "Sir," the first officer said to Grandpa, his voice tense, "step out with your hands visible." "Is that gate actively electrified?" Grandpa didn't even stand up. "Yes, officer," he replied, his voice perfectly even. "It is registered, permitted, clearly posted with multiple warnings, and currently being recorded. Here is the paperwork." He slid the laminated permit across the porch table. "And here," he said, holding up a tablet computer, "is the video evidence you'll need." He tapped the screen, and the video of Doyle's attack began to play. The officers watched, their expressions shifting from suspicion to disbelief. They saw the entire sequence, the approach in the dead of night, the bolt cutters, the attempt to cut the gate, the shock, the fall. They saw it all in full HD. One officer looked up from the screen, his face a mask of stone. He turned to Doyle. "So you admit to trespassing with the intent to destroy property?" Doyle sputtered. "No. It was an official HOA inspection." The other officer raised an eyebrow. "An inspection?" At midnight, with bolt cutters, the law was an iron cage, and Doyle had just locked himself inside it and thrown away the key. The officers didn't need to deliberate. They had a signed permit, clear video evidence of multiple felonies, and a live recording of a false 911 call. They cuffed Doyle right there, in the glow of the very gate he had tried to destroy. Doyle howled about conspiracies, about Grandpa being a public menace, but his words were just the pathetic noise of a defeated man. Neighbors had poured out of their houses, drawn by the commotion, and this time they weren't whispering, they were applauding. Doyle called the police to be his saviors. Instead, they became his judge, jury, and taxi service to the county jail. The aftermath was a complete and total rout. Doyle Mason sat in the back of that police cruiser, drenched and defeated, his pathetic reign of HOA tyranny shattered into a million pieces. News of his arrest for criminal trespassing, vandalism, attempted theft, and filing a false police report was the lead story on the local news website by morning, complete with his glorious, mud-streaked mugshot. But Grandpa wasn't finished. The foot soldier had been captured. Now it was time to take down the general. Armed with the official police report and a petition signed by nearly every resident in the neighborhood demanding the board's resignation, Grandpa attended the emergency HOA meeting the following week. He didn't have to say a word. He just stood at the back of the packed community room while another resident read the police report aloud. Every sordid detail, every lie Doyle had told, was laid bare. When the report mentioned that Doyle had confessed Linda Clay had encouraged his proactive enforcement, a wave of outrage swept through the room. Linda tried to deny it, but her face was pale, her composure gone. She was exposed, her corrupt little empire crumbling around her. A vote of no confidence was called, and she and her entire board were forced to resign in disgrace, right then and there. A few months later, we received a check in the mail. It was a settlement from the HOA's insurance carrier. Grandpa had filed a civil lawsuit for harassment and negligence, and they had settled immediately rather than face him in court. He endorsed the check and donated the entire amount to a local veterans charity. The community was restored. A new, fair board was elected. People started talking to each other again. The dark cloud of oppression that Doyle and Linda had cast over the neighborhood was gone. Doyle Mason eventually took a plea deal, receiving 2 years of probation and a court order to never set foot in our neighborhood again. His house went up for sale a month later. My life as a Navy SEAL was supposed to be in the rear-view mirror, buried under lawn mowers and neighborhood barbecues. I traded my helmet for a baseball cap, my rifle for a garden hose. I was done. But one afternoon, the savage world I left behind came crashing onto my front lawn, and it reminded me that you can take the man out of the war, but you can never take the war out of the man. 3 clowns playing dress-up in tactical vests breached my property, claiming the authority of the HOA. They swaggered onto my grass with the unearned confidence of men who have never faced a real threat. And one of them, in a moment of pure terminal stupidity, made a mistake that would not only end his day, but dismantle an entire corrupt empire. He laid a hand on my wife. By sunset, their faces were rearranged into something unrecognizable. Before this takedown begins, drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far this story of justice echoes across the globe. The fuse was lit that morning, under a calm blue sky that gave no hint of the violence to come. My wife, Sarah, was out watering the hydrangeas that lined our walkway. She's the reason I'm sane. The reason I can sleep at night without the ghosts of faraway deserts creeping in. She's also a SEAL's wife, which means her situational awareness is better than most active duty soldiers. She clocked the blacked-out SUV the second it entered our cul-de-sac. It made 3 slow, deliberate passes, a predator casing its prey, before killing the engine directly across the street. The doors opened, and 3 men deployed. They were all big, thick-necked guys draped in cheap, dark tactical vests with crooked, shiny police patches stitched onto the front. To the untrained eye of our neighbors, they probably looked intimidating. Official, even. But to Sarah, they looked like a joke. She saw the details. Their duty belts were flimsy nylon, sagging under the weight of plastic holsters holding what were probably airsoft pistols. Not a single one of them had a radio, an earpiece, or any kind of communications gear. No real cop, no real operator ever rolls out blind, cut off from his team and his command. They were amateurs. Dangerous amateurs. One of them, the tallest with an ego that radiated off him in waves, marched straight for our yard, his boots chewing up the lawn I'd just mowed. "Ma'am, HOA compliance inspection," he snarled, his voice a theatrical bark he probably practiced in the mirror. He flashed a badge from a cheap leather holder, but it was so phony, so dull, it looked like it had fallen out of a cereal box. Sarah didn't flinch. Her voice was pure ice. "Since when does the HOA employ a police force?" The second man, shorter and built like a fire hydrant, let a greasy smirk slide across his face. "We're not employed, lady," he sneered. "We are the law here." Sarah stood her ground. "You are trespassing on private property," she stated, each word a perfectly enunciated fact. "I'm asking you one time to leave immediately, before I call the real police." Instead of retreating, the third one swaggered closer, his hand dropping to the toy baton on his hip in a pathetic attempt at intimidation. When Sarah raised her phone to document their faces and their illegal presence on our land, he moved. He slapped the phone from her grasp, sending it skittering across the flagstones. And then, in a single, unforgivable moment that ignited every violent instinct I have buried deep inside me, he backhanded Sarah across the face. The sound of it, a sharp, ugly crack, reached me in the garage where I was breaking down some old deployment gear. That sound flipped a switch in my soul. In that instant, every ounce of the quiet suburban husband evaporated, and the operator took over. I emerged from the garage, moving with a purpose they could not possibly comprehend. I saw my wife clutching her cheek, a red mark already blooming on her skin. I saw these 3 wannabe warlords puffing out their chests like they'd just conquered a foreign nation. I didn't yell. I didn't run. I closed the distance, my footsteps silent on the driveway. "You boys just picked the wrong house," I said, my voice low, flat, and devoid of all emotion. "You have 5 seconds to tell me who sent you before I start taking you apart, piece by piece." The tall one tried to hold his ground, to project an authority he had never earned. "The HOA president says you've been ignoring violation notices. We're the enforcement." He tried to lock eyes, to stare me down. I've been stared down by men who execute prisoners for a living. This suburban poser in a counterfeit vest was a gnat, an insect, nothing. I turned my head slightly. "Sarah, go inside." "Lock the door," I commanded. She didn't hesitate. She knows the look in my eyes. She knows when the negotiation is over. I stepped into their space, close enough to smell the cheap cologne and stale coffee on their breath. "You touch my wife again," I promised, my voice a whisper of pure death, "and you will leave here in a coroner's bag." They tried to laugh it off, a nervous, brittle sound, but their bravado shattered when I demanded to see their credentials and their peace officer licenses. They refused. Real law enforcement officers are legally required to identify themselves. That's when every piece of the puzzle locked into place. This wasn't just trespassing. This was impersonating an officer, a federal felony. And right there, with the whole neighborhood peering from behind their curtains, I decided to end their careers, their conspiracy, and their day, right on my front lawn. They thought they were intimidating a suburban housewife. They had just declared war on a man who hunted other men for a living. To understand what happened next, you have to understand my background. The HOA and their hired thugs looked at me and saw a guy in his late 30s who spends his weekends fertilizing his lawn. They had no idea they were poking a man who, for 15 years, was a member of the United States Naval Special Warfare Development Group, the unit most people know as SEAL Team 6. My specialty wasn't just kicking in doors, it was close-quarters battle and high-value target extraction. My body is a weapon, forged in the fires of countless training facilities and honed in the shadows of places that don't officially exist. My hands are registered with a government that taught me how to use them to dismantle a human being with surgical precision. When I saw that red mark on my wife's face, that part of me, the part I had tried so hard to bury, came roaring back to the surface. The operator took over. My legacy in this quiet neighborhood was as the helpful guy down the street. I was the one who showed up with a chainsaw after a storm to clear fallen trees from driveways. I was the one who rewired Mr. Henderson's generator during a blackout. He told me once, "Son, I saw you during that storm. While everyone else was panicking, you just moved. Like there was no chaos, just a problem that needed to be solved." It was unnerving and incredibly reassuring. The residents here knew me as a quiet professional. They had no idea what that profession actually was. The HOA president, this woman named Karen Ellis, thought she was hiring muscle. She had no idea she was sending 3 undisciplined, untrained amateurs to fight a master of state-sponsored violence. Her corrupt little empire was the cancer of our community. Karen Ellis ran the HOA like a personal fiefdom. She was a petty tyrant who weaponized the bylaws for profit and control. We found out later that her brother owned a massive landscaping and contracting company. It was a simple, dirty scheme. Karen would have her enforcers, like Doyle Mason before these new thugs, harass a homeowner with a blizzard of violation notices for anything. The wrong shade of trim paint, a crack in the driveway, a fence that was supposedly half an inch too high. When the homeowner was worn down, she would graciously recommend her brother's company as the only board-approved vendor to fix the problem at a grossly inflated price. She was getting kickbacks from every job. It was a protection racket disguised as community management. She had crushed people. The Garcias, a young family with 2 kids, were driven out of their home by thousands of dollars in fines over a swing set. She put a lien on the house of an elderly veteran 2 streets over because the American flag he flew was, in her opinion, tattered. Our turn came when we adopted 2 Belgian Malinois, both trained service animals to help with my own post-deployment issues. The violation notices started appearing. They were aggressive breeds. They were a nuisance. They were a violation of a bylaw that didn't even exist. I responded to each notice with a polite, registered letter citing the Americans with Disabilities Act and the federal protections for service animals. My meticulous documentation, a habit drilled into me from years of filing after-action reports, only seemed to make her angrier. This wasn't about a truck or a fence or a dog. It was a power play. And Karen Ellis was about to learn what happens when you try to strong-arm a man who can't be broken, only unleashed. The second I confirmed these clowns were impersonating officers, the rules of engagement changed in my mind. I didn't raise my fists, but my entire posture shifted. My feet planted shoulder-width apart, my center of gravity lowered, my hands loose but ready. It was the same stance I took on a dozen deployments right before a room was about to be cleared the hard way. The 3 imposters felt the temperature drop. Their nervous laughter died in their throats. The tall one, their self-appointed squad leader, stabbed a finger in my direction. "You think you're above HOA rules? We have warnings for your truck, your fence, and those so-called military dogs. We're enforcing compliance." A dark, cold chuckle rumbled in my chest. "First," I said, my voice a razor's edge, "my truck is parked legally. My fence is built to city code, and those dogs are certified service animals protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act, a federal law you might want to read up on." I took another step forward, invading his space and forcing him back on his heels. "Second, you are trespassing and committing a federal felony by impersonating officers under Section 912 of Title 18 of the United States Code. That's a 10-year prison sentence if you get a sympathetic judge." The shorter one, desperate to reclaim some imaginary authority, puffed out his chest. "You can't threaten us. We'll have you in cuffs." He fumbled at his Velcro belt, producing a pair of toy-grade handcuffs that wouldn't restrain a determined teenager. That was it. The last molecule of my patience sublimated into pure, controlled action. I moved. My left hand snaked out, seizing his wrist in a hyper-flexing lock that sent a shock of pain up his arm and the cuffs clattering to the driveway. My right elbow drove upward in a clean, controlled arc that connected with the point of his jaw. It wasn't a punch. It was a brachial stun, a nerve strike. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he folded like a cheap suit, hitting the lawn without a sound. The second guy reacted with a panicked roar, swinging his baton in a wild, untrained arc. It was amateur hour. I pivoted inside the swing, letting the baton whistle past my ear. I caught his arm mid-stroke, clamped down on his wrist and elbow, and used his own momentum to send him flipping over my shoulder in a classic hip throw. He landed hard on the concrete driveway with a wet, sickening crack that made the neighbors who were gathering on the sidewalk gasp in unison. The leader was frozen, his eyes wide with a terror he had never known. He had built his life on being the biggest dog in the yard, and he had just run into a wolf. He tried to keep the fantasy alive. "You're assaulting an officer!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. I closed the remaining distance until he could feel my body heat, until my shadow completely enveloped him. "No," I corrected him, my voice a low growl. "I'm neutralizing 3 criminals who assaulted my wife." There's a very big difference. Just then, Sarah reappeared at the front door, her phone back in her hand, recording everything. "Sheriff's on the way," she announced, her voice ringing with the authority of a field commander. "ETA 2 minutes." The leader cursed and made a desperate break for the SUV. I wasn't letting him escape. I lunged, my hand grabbing the back of his cheap vest, and used his own weight to yank him off balance. I slammed him face first onto the hood of his vehicle with enough force to make the chassis groan. He struggled for a moment, but it was useless. He had no training, no technique, just cheap nylon and a stitched-on lie. By the time the real deputies arrived, 2 of the fakes were writhing on the ground, clutching their dislocated joints and shattered jaws, and their leader was pinned to the SUV with my knee planted firmly in the small of his back. The deputies rolled up hot, weapons drawn, professionals in a world of amateurs. "Hands! Let me see your hands!" I raised mine immediately, stepping back from the pinned thug, showing them I was not the threat. Sarah was already talking to them, pointing out the trash on our lawn. Those 3, they claimed to be cops. They hit me. The deputies were efficient. They secured the 3 moaning imposters, ripped the counterfeit vests from their bodies, and within minutes, under the pressure of real law enforcement, the truth was pouring out. The ringleader broke first, babbling about how HOA President Karen Ellis had paid them $500 cash to teach us a lesson. And in that moment, with the flashing blue and red lights painting the houses on our quiet street, I knew this wasn't just petty harassment. This was a state-level criminal conspiracy, and I was going to pull it up by the roots and burn it to the ground. If you're here for this brand of justice, hammer that like and subscribe button. Because the final act is pure, unadulterated payback. Down at the sheriff's station, the 3 so-called officers were a pathetic sight. Their fake uniforms were in evidence bags, their wrists were in real steel cuffs, and their fabricated story was disintegrating under professional interrogation. They confessed to what I already knew. HOA President Karen Ellis had hired them off a shady Craigslist ad for private security. Her instructions were explicit: rough me up, terrorize Sarah, and force us to comply with her imaginary violations. When a detective asked if I wanted to press charges, I didn't blink. "Absolutely," I stated, my voice cold as steel. "Impersonating an officer, conspiracy to commit assault, and battery. I want every single charge that sticks. They're going to learn what happens when you bring a war to my family's doorstep." But the fight had now shifted to a new battlefield. The physical threat was neutralized. The strategic war was just beginning. Karen Ellis, drowning in her own arrogance, made her next fatal mistake. By the end of the day, she had her lawyer file a civil suit against me for excessive force and for damaging the reputation of the homeowners association. She actually tried to argue in the legal filing that her hired felons were legitimate security contractors and that I, a trained Navy SEAL, had overreacted. My attorney, a Bulldog ex-JAG officer I knew from my time in the service, laughed out loud when he read the filing. "This is a gift from God," he told me over the phone. "This is a tactical error of epic proportions. We're going to countersue for conspiracy, assault, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. And since you have everything on high-definition video, we're not just going to win, we're going to burn her entire empire to the ground." But my retaliation wasn't just going to be in civil court. While my lawyer prepared the countersuit, I was running my own intelligence operation. I used the same open-source intelligence techniques I'd used to track insurgents to build a kill package on Karen Ellis. I pulled property records, business licenses, and court filings. I discovered that her brother's board-approved contracting company had a history of lawsuits for shoddy work, and that Karen was a silent partner in the LLC. I found the shell corporation for the security firm, proving they were unlicensed and uninsured, making the HOA's liability absolute. But then I found the kill shot. By hiring thugs to intimidate a disabled veteran over his ADA-protected service animals, Karen Ellis hadn't just violated local ordinances. She had violated the Federal Fair Housing Act. Karen thought this was a civil dispute that would be buried in paperwork. She had no idea my report was already being compiled for the Department of Justice, flagging her for a federal crime. The court date for her frivolous lawsuit came fast. On one side of the room sat Karen Ellis, smug and self-righteous in her power suit, whispering to her discount lawyer. On my side, Sarah squeezed my hand, her composure unbreakable. The judge, a no-nonsense former prosecutor, had the HOA's lawyer present first. Their entire argument was a pathetic tapestry of lies that was systematically shredded the instant Sarah's video played on the courtroom monitors. The entire room watched the assault. They saw Sarah get slapped. They saw me give the verbal warnings. They saw the fake badges and the brutal, unprovoked attack unfold in broad daylight. The judge leaned back in his chair, his face a mask of utter contempt. "These men are felons, and you, Mrs. Ellis, hired them." He turned to her lawyer. "Not only is your lawsuit dismissed with extreme prejudice, but I am sanctioning you and your client for malicious prosecution and abuse of the legal system. You will be paying Mr. and Mrs. Miller's legal fees." My attorney then stood, his voice ringing with authority. "Your Honor, we are filing our counterclaim at this time. We allege a pattern of racketeering and conspiracy under the RICO Act, in addition to assault and harassment. We will prove that Mrs. Ellis used the HOA as a criminal enterprise." Karen's face went white. Her mask of suburban tyranny shattered as the financial and criminal weight of her actions crashed down on her. When the gavel fell, the judge had not only annihilated her case, but had ordered her personally liable for all damages. Her empire of intimidation was publicly executed. As for her 3 thugs, the judge denied them bail, calling them a danger to the community. They were facing a raft of felony charges. But the final blow was yet to come. 2 weeks later, 2 agents from the FBI's Civil Rights Division showed up at Karen Ellis's front door with a federal warrant. My report to the DOJ had triggered a full-scale investigation. Her little protection racket was now a federal case. The HOA's insurance carrier dropped them instantly, citing the criminal activity, effectively bankrupting the organization. Karen Ellis was financially ruined, publicly humiliated, and facing the full, terrifying weight of the United States government. They wanted to see what a warrior looked like. Now they know.